Good afternoon, everybody. It is now 3 o'clock in London, so let's get started. Thank you for joining today's Open Sensors webinar. We will be going through 4 ways that you can use to manage asset and space allocation in the hybrid era. My name is David Thomas, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Before we actually get into the session, I'm just going to go through a brief kind of outline of what it is we'll be covering and what you can expect to learn. I'm going to start off by looking at some of the things that have changed in the workplace and the way that we're working, which mean that considering space allocation and the assets in the workplace are really important at the moment. And then we're going to go and look at these 4 ways of how to actually kind of bring that into your strategies and look at making incremental changes to your workplace and your real estate. So the first of these methods that we're going to look at is understanding the actual assets and workstation types that you have throughout your workplace, looking at the data you can gather to understand how they're being used and how to identify the opportunities to fine-tune and optimize your workplace and identify the areas which you can perhaps swap out to make those changes. Secondly, we're going to take a step away from the actual spaces themselves and look at how those spaces are used. And we do this by creating mobility profiles by looking at the data of how assets themselves are used by different people and you working in different working styles. Thirdly, we're going to take another step back and look at how these spaces can be accessed throughout the week and how a booking tool is really vital in making sure that the spaces you are providing are well used, and how that data can add an extra layer of clarity to what's actually taking place within your workplace. And then finally, we're going to look at space from a real estate perspective. So looking at your actual entire portfolio and trying to work out whether or not it's most appropriate for what you're trying to achieve with your current strategies. So let's get started with some of the changes that we've seen take place realistically since companies have kind of gone into their return to work policies in earnest since offices have reopened and lockdowns have ended. So the first of these is quite an obvious one, and it's that as employees have been given the freedom to work more flexibly or remotely, kind of at their own discretion, it's led to a more unpredictable and varying nature of working patterns, and it changes from what your at home circumstances are, what your job is, but basically it's led to a whole new series of strains being placed on the workplace, and the way that people are interacting with the workplace has changed. So the workplace has to evolve to keep up with this to make sure that it stays relevant and effective. So the second point that quite a lot of people have been coming to us with as a sort of challenge is the fact that just because you're in the office for a day doesn't mean that everybody else is. So meetings, the nature of meetings and collaborations kind of changed, where you need to be accounting for people who are at home, people in the office, whether they're in a room together. You need to be able to kind of bring people together no matter where they are and make sure that the spaces and resources are there to make this a smooth experience. The third point that's kind of changed a lot is that because people are working more in their kind of own style and in the way that they want, they've become, I'd say, pickier, I guess, or more specific in when they're coming into the office. They have a specific task in mind that they want to do. Maybe they want to meet up with certain people, get a certain piece of collaboration done. And this requires, or they would like to have specific resources available or workstations or assets available to get those tasks done. So making sure that you have the right balance of those spaces available for people to use is really important so that these projects can get underway and completed on time. And the fourth point, and potentially the one that we hear most about, is the kind of rise of space sharing and hoteling, which has come about due to people no longer really needing their own assigned seat. If you're at home 2 or 3 days a week, having your own desk in the office is just a financial no-brainer. It's not really necessary. So it's all about finding that correct ratio of desks for people who want to come in, share space, and want to make sure they always have somewhere to access. So let's move on now and take a look at what we can actually do to fix this. And before we do, I just quickly so we're going to be talking about tagging quite a lot today, as in tagging sensors and describing them in certain ways. So I just want to give a brief overview of how our utilization occupancy solution works, so that when we talk about tagging, you have a bit of an idea of what we actually mean. So when we do utilization studies throughout an office, we place sensors in meeting rooms, conference rooms, under desks, phone booths, any kind of place that you want to monitor. There will be a sensor there, and then this sensor is connected to a gateway via the LoRaWAN alliance, and then this gateway uses own SIM to send it to the dashboard. But it all starts with the sensors, and it's not just saying desk or meeting room, or it can just be saying desk or meeting room, but what is more valuable is to take the time when you're setting up this kind of solution to think, what different ways can we use to define or describe these sensors, and how do they differentiate from one another? And then you can tag them accordingly and build up a profile of how all the different spaces in your office are being used and which ones are most popular. And this leads us nicely into the first part of our method one, which is to do with monitoring asset utilization. So as I was just saying, these sensors are put throughout offices, meeting rooms, desks, doesn't matter, they can all be tagged accordingly. And what you then get when you have these tags of how spaces are, whether it's a sit-stand desk, east-facing, west-facing, whatever, there's a number of examples on the right-hand side here. You can then see how they're actually being used throughout the week by your employees. And you can see which ones are highly in demand and which ones aren't. And then this means that you can start to make changes based on what you can see your employees want to use. So if you have a certain asset that's very popular and has always kind of been highly competed over, you can start to think, okay, we need more of them. But then on the flip side, you can then look at those assets which are very underutilized and are just kind of sitting there empty as a bit of a waste of space, and say, cool, we can repurpose this area. It won't really affect anyone because they're not very well used, and we can provide more of what our employees actually need. And this is kind of a very simple way of making sure that the workplace you have is suited to the needs of your employees. And that's kind of very fundamental in making sure that employees will actually want to come back to the workplace in the first place. In return to work plans, the ones we've seen be most successful are the ones where you're not mandating rules, but you're just trying your hardest to make sure the workplace is attractive and an effective place to work productively. Just a quick thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, but there is a Q&A function in the Zoom webinar. So if at any point you want me to clarify something, or you have an unrelated question, please do send it across and I will do my best to get to it as we go through. So yeah, that's asset utilization to do with the spaces, the types of spaces that you're providing, and making sure that that's correct. The second way I want to look at tagging to do with space is on a departmental level. And this is kind of from a higher level of looking at things, or a more zoomed out level, making sure that the people you have in the organization are actually going to fit in the space. And assets can be tagged not only by what that asset is, but by what team they belong to, what department they belong to. And this is really important when people come to us talking about the need to grow within a limited space. They want to make sure that as teams keep expanding or the organization keeps growing, that there's the space for people to work. And obviously you don't want to, every time you expand a bit, move office. So it's all about getting the most out of your space. And one of the best ways to do this is essentially take the same methodology that we used with the assets and do it on a departmental level. Identify which of the teams are using the space to fully, and which ones aren't. And then we can see which departments are trending upwards in terms of usage, which ones are stagnating, and potentially which ones are dropping down as well. And this makes it really easy to kind of take resources from one department and give them to another, so that as the teams that are growing grow, they have the space they need within the existing environment. And this data becomes invaluable when you're kind of trying to deal with these situations, because going into this kind of conversation unarmed, without data, it very often doesn't go there, because people are quite loath to give up space, even if they're not using it. And people's interpretation of how they use space is often very different to how space is actually being used. But if you can go into these conversations saying, this is what's been happening over the last 4 months, this department's growing X rate, this department's stagnating, and they have X amount of extra desks, we need them, it leads to a far more productive conversation around how that space is being used. So that's two of the ways that we can look at space. And the third is one that I'm sure most of you have engaged with at least sometimes, and been frustrated with, and that's meeting rooms and conference rooms. Like, I don't know how many times I've had to deal with it where you'll be walking around desperately trying to find someone to hold a meeting, and there's none available to book, but then you look around and there's 5 of you trying to get a space, and then there's a 5-person meeting room, which is 1 or 2 people, or a 10-person meeting room with 3. And not only is it frustrating for the employees who can't find a space, but it's also a very poor usage of assets. It's essentially wasting money on spaces that should be repurposed. And the way to fix this is by using counter sensors, which tell you not only how often throughout the day a space is actually in use, but how many people are in that room at any one time. And then what you can see on the right-hand side is the results of what deploying these sensors can do. So if you know what array of rooms you've got, what their maximum capacities are, and actually how people were using them throughout the week, we have a calculator that can then say, okay, you have this array, what would be more appropriate based on how they were used throughout the last XYZ period, whatever you're looking at, would be this array. And then you can kind of immediately see, right, this is what we should be either looking to move to or refit our office to fit. And that way, the same with desks and different workstation assets, you know that the meeting rooms you've got are tailored to how your employees are choosing to work at that time. So combined, these 3 ways of looking at space kind of ensure that the teams themselves have the right amount of space for them to occupy, they've got the assets they need, and your general meeting room spread is appropriate for how your organization is working. The next thing I want to talk you through is the mobility profile aspect of things, which is looking not so much at what the assets are throughout the space, but how those assets are used throughout the week, and how they are accessed by people who work in different working styles, whether they kind of come to the office every day, or they come in a couple of days a week, or they're in every day, but they're floating around the office doing different things like collaborating on meetings and that kind of thing. And the reason that we've started looking at this is that we found that as organizations' working styles become more fluid and more agile, looking solely at average utilization isn't really enough anymore. We need to know more about how many people are working in different ways to make sure that the spread of assets is actually appropriate for that. And that's where these mobility profiles come in. And what you can see in the image on the right is the kind of definitions of what these are. So at one end, we've got fixed, and these are the assets which are in use pretty much all day, every day, and realistically act as assigned seats. And this might be due to the fact that it's a department which has to be in the office every day. And then on the complete opposite side, on the left, we have unused, and these are the ones that are used less than 1% of the day. And these are the ones which realistically are ripe to be repurposed. At the moment, they're just kind of empty space which you're paying for and it isn't being used. Where it gets interesting is in the middle, where you have mobile, semi-mobile, and semi-fixed. And these are the spaces where people might be coming into the office, kind of getting a desk, touching down there for the beginning of the day, and then leaving their stuff there and flitting it between that desk and their meeting rooms for the whole day, or kind of spending half the day there, half the day somewhere else, but still holding onto the desk. It's definable by case, but these are the ways that we've tried to split it up. And what this means is that if you look and you can see that you've got lots of mobile desks or semi-mobile desks where they are in use throughout the day constantly, but only for little bursts of time, it might be more appropriate to consider providing people with storage spaces where they can touch down there instead of taking up a desk if they know they're not actually going to be using it for the whole day. So combining this approach with the previous one of looking at the assets that you've got enables you to make sure that you are providing the spaces that employees want to work in, but also the correct amount, the correct kind of access to them. So the people who have a fixed desk or a fixed meeting room space. And it's all about making sure that the people who need the space on a more flexible basis can do so, and those who need it all the time can do so as well. But when we are talking about flexible work, it's also very, very important to make sure that not only are the spaces there, but people can access them, and they can do that quickly and easily. And that's where booking tools come in. So by introducing a booking tool, you're kind of opening up the whole workplace to everyone. You're providing a centralized point of access that everyone can share in and everyone can use to find the spaces they need well in advance or on the day. And it's a good way of making sure that people know what's actually available to them, because some of these offices are quite big. You might not have gone everywhere throughout it. And a booking tool brings everything to the fore and make sure that everyone has access to the spaces that are available all the time. And it means that they can then more accurately and in more confidence plan their working week or their working month based around the tasks that they have at hand. Because there's nothing more frustrating than in an agile environment than deciding to journey in, but then actually finding that the spaces you need are unavailable on that day. So you and your colleagues are left unable to do the tasks in mind that you had. So I'm just going to take you through quickly some of the primary ways in which these booking tools work. So the GIF on the left that you can see here is just an example of how easy it is to kind of look at the spaces that you have, put the time and date in, and then book that space itself. And this is what we mean by providing individual agency in the working week and making sure that assets can be used. And on the right, on the right are some of the key features that we have to kind of make it as easy to use as possible for people, to make sure that the spaces that are booked and the spaces that are available are used at their most. And these come through the fact that our booking system is interwoven with the sensors that provide the utilization data, which opens up a load of automated features. So the sensors themselves will detect when people arrive and check them in, so there's no need to do that every single day. But they will also notice if someone doesn't show up, and then it will cancel the booking, release it for someone else to come and use it afterwards. So it's kind of making it just a part and parcel of the daily features of the office or the daily process of the office without having to do anything else yourself. But also, one of the best things about these booking tools and the way that they use the utilization data is that they encourage you to access parts of the workplace that you wouldn't have before. So if you were searching for a space on a certain time and date, it would know based on your previous activities what spaces you typically use. So it would suggest them for you. But then if that's then not available, it can look at those tags and what those spaces are kind of defined by, what their features are, and suggest similar spaces. So instead of going, oh, my favorite desk isn't available, it will say, but there's here one that has the exact same features, it's just on a different floor that you maybe didn't know about. And this is a great way of making sure that spaces don't go to waste just because people don't know that they exist. And similarly, you can search by the features themselves. So if you know that you want to sit, stand, desk, you can filter that way. And any way that you can tag or compare them in the utilization system then pops up in the booking system as well. The second way which we find the booking solution really helps with space allocation is the fact that these sensors can also be tagged by department. So as you're building up these profiles of departmental usage and kind of defining how much space each department needs, you can then set users' preferences so that they only belong to a certain group. So you're defining the space they need, working that out based on raw utilization data, and then actually putting that into the booking system so that that model is what is actually acted on within the workplace. And then as you make changes, you can change the booking system to suit it, and then it means that everyone's fitting in the correct place. One thing that I would say is that you can't kind of treat that as a 100% model. You're still going to probably need some touchdown spaces for people that have to come in on a very last minute emergency basis and need somewhere to go. So don't kind of like make it the be all and end all, but you can pretty much assure that everyone has their own space and that there's a logic behind how space is allocated if you have a synced up booking system and utilization report going on in the background. So the final way that I wanted to talk about space is looking at your actual real estate. And you can do this on a short-term basis. And these are some of the metrics that we're looking at that can help with that. And this is when you kind of wanted to make sure that the changes you're making to your workplace or your workplace strategy are kind of working or are being effective. And that's a monthly occupancy trends is a great way to start with that. So seeing like if you're trying to encourage people back, is that line going up? Is it going down? Or has it had no effect whatsoever? And then you can start to tweak those policies or tweak those changes to see what the effect is. And a common thing that we've had people coming to us with at the moment is saying, at some times in the week, our office is very, very busy, but other times it's completely empty. And typically Monday, Friday, empty, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, very busy. And people are saying, do we need to expand our real estate because of this? Because we are sometimes at peak. And that's not the case. What you can then do is try to identify who's coming in on those days, what's going on, and plan work rotations around that, trying to encourage people to come in on Monday and Friday, maybe having different weeks for different departments, but they have to be on a Monday, that kind of thing. And we do have a separate webinar which went through this in some more detail. So if you do want to know more about that, let me know and I can send it across to you. But then the other metrics to look at here are, again, department and floor. So making sure that all of your real estate is being used effectively, not just isolated areas. You want to make sure that the policies you're doing are hitting everywhere all at once, and the effect is kind of effective throughout your entire portfolio. And then if we want to look at long term, you can look at some of these stats of seeing how well they're used throughout the day. Is your person to desk ratio kind of going in the right direction? How much of your space is being underutilized? And when you're looking at this kind of long-term planning, it's often to do with things like, well, we've had quite a few people come into us saying, we're not so sure that we want to keep our centralized HQ anymore. As people are working more flexibly, they're not so keen to commute for so long or so far, but we'd rather move to a hub system. But we don't really know what that should look like. And the first step in doing that is really understanding how your space is being used at the moment, and then thinking of the best way to divide that up and what that space needs to look like spread over multiple different locations. But again, looking at kind of things from a departmental basis, if you are trying to rejig space from one team to another and making sure that that's the way that you're spreading space, when you stop being able to do that and when each team is kind of at full capacity, that's probably when you need to start thinking more to yourself, okay, now we need to actually take a look, take a step back and reevaluate whether or not this space is right for us. So that is the crux of the presentation. If you have any questions, please do get in touch, either through hello@OpenSensors, where you can fill in a get in touch form, or visit opensensors.com where you can fill in a get in touch form, or you can email hello@OpenSensors or email myself at david.a@opensensors.com. Be more than happy to answer any of your questions and see how we can help you with any of your current workplace challenges. Thank you all very much for coming along, and I hope you have very good days and afternoons. Cheers. Bye.